Sometimes simple cards can feel, well, too simple. But here's the trick. Add vellum and suddenly it's elevated. In this video, I'll show you how to use vellum to give even a basic fancy fold card that polished professional look without layers upon layers or complicated steps. Quick, easy, and gorgeous results every time. Let's dive in. So in this video, I'm going to show you a few ways you can use vellum to accent and seriously elevate your cards. I'm using a lightweight vellum here, and you can see just how translucent it is. Like barely there, but very fancy kind of translucent. I was going to use this paper pack from Not Too Shabby. You will see me changing my mind later, but I will reach for this set again in the next project because it's honestly very, very pretty. I already have a 10-fold card base ready, and the whole idea here is to add a translucent strip of embossed vellum to the card front and then embellish it. This is a very simple card. It's going to come together quickly, but it's one of those cards that looks like you tried way harder than you actually did, which is my favorite kind. The first thing I want to do is emboss the vellum. Now, whenever you emboss vellum, it's always a good idea to place a piece of cardstock directly behind it. Think of the cardstock as a little helper for the vellum because it helps reduce cracking during embossing. Vellum can crack depending on the design and how intricate your embossing folder is. And when it comes to 3D embossing folders, let's be honest, they're a bit more challenging. They have a lot of detail, they create more pressure, and that extra pressure increases the chance of cracking. Of course, adding cardstock behind the vellum doesn't guarantee zero cracking, but it definitely helps a lot. And I'll take helps a lot any day. This embossing folder fits almost a full A2 panel, but I only need a small band and I can keep the leftover for something else. I chose this embossing folder not just for its beautiful design, but also because it coordinates beautifully with the pattern paper I'm planning to use. The designs are similar enough that they look like they were meant to be together, and being able to create a cohesive look is always very satisfying. But again, I'll be changing my mind later in the process, so all the strategizing was actually useless. Normally, when I emboss cardstock, I lightly mist it with water, but absolutely not with vellum. Vellum and moisture do not get along because the vellum will curl up if exposed to moisture. So we're embossing this completely dry. I'll line everything up inside the embossing folder and have the vellum with the cardstock directly behind it. I'm using my Spellbinders Platinum 6 machine to emboss. If you're using a different machine, definitely check your manual so you're using the correct plates. For my embossing sandwich, I'll need plate A, the embossing folder with the vellum and cardstock inside, and the adapter plate D, and run that through the machine. And we have a 2-for-1. I've embossed both the vellum and the cardstock, and if you look closely, the vellum has no cracking at all. Beautifully embossed. I also now have an extra embossed cardstock panel for a future project. I'll set those aside and decide where my vellum band will sit on the card front. About here looks good, so I'm going to remove about 1 inch from the bottom and then another 1 3/4 inches. Don't throw any of these pieces away, by the way. This bottom piece will sit right here and anchor the vellum band, and I'll also use strips from the other piece to clean up the back. And I'll show you what I exactly mean in a bit. Since the opening will be 1 3/4 inches on the card front, I now need a piece of vellum that's 2 by 4 1/4 inches to cover the gap and also have some margin to apply adhesive. I've included all the measurements in my blog post so you can refer to them when you're making this card. Any leftover scraps go straight into the future project pile. Now I'm going to place the vellum here. I need to attach this piece, and honestly, look at how pretty this already is. I could stop right now and call it a day. In fact, I'm suddenly questioning whether I even need the pattern paper anymore. Vellum is really doing most of the work here. Then I'll apply glue to this piece along the edge and line it up as carefully as possible. I want to make sure I have it facing the right way. It appears that I may have cut the vellum a hair too small. You can see it's slightly narrower than the card base, so I'll let the glue dry for just a moment first and then trim off the tiniest sliver so everything lines up perfectly. And when I say tiny, I mean tiny. That's all I removed, and now everything is even. If we flip this over, the back isn't perfect. It's not terrible, but it also doesn't look completely neat. That's where this strip of cardstock comes in. I'll create 2 narrow strips about 1/4 inch each and adhere them along the edges. Once the glue dries, I'll trim off any overhanging bits and everything will be neat. And look at how pretty this is already. Now I need to deal with the inside of the card before finishing the front. Because vellum is translucent, I don't want a handwritten message showing through the front. So instead of lining the entire inside, I'm just adding a small cardstock panel at the top. I'll mark it lightly with a pencil and cut a piece that's 2.5 by 4 inches. I'll adhere it right here. And once it's in place, it disappears from the front and you still get that gorgeous lacy effect through the vellum. Now it's time to finish the card front. I have some die cuts I made from Pinkfresh Studio washi tape and I'm going to add a few here. I frequently reach for these die cuts and it's so convenient for quick card making. Since the washi tape has gold foiling, I want a gold foil sentiment to match. I keep all my sentiments together in this album and I think Thinking of You works perfectly for this card. It's delicate, gentle, and just feels right. I'll add a contrasting butterfly and I have a few options to choose from. I'm definitely overthinking this a little, but I should audition all of the candidates first. Wouldn't you agree? Alright, this is the chosen one. And if you're looking for the list of supplies, you'll find affiliate links in my blog post that I've linked in the video description. While they won't cost you anything extra, it will definitely help out my channel a lot. Thank you so much if you decide to support me by using my links when you shop. Since this is vellum, I don't want to apply glue to the leaves in the center because the glue would show through the vellum at the back. So I'll just glue the stem first and see where the die cut falls naturally before applying glue anywhere else. I'm using a scrap piece of cardstock to apply glue only where it won't be visible. The leaves stay free and I'm just anchoring the sprig. For the butterfly and sentiment, I'll use foam tape. I'll start with the sentiment, which will be my guide for placing the butterfly. I'll gently curl the wings to give it some dimension. Because the leaf angles this way, I'll have the butterfly facing the opposite direction for balance. Since I don't want the wings to collapse, I'll add 2 more tiny pieces of foam tape. That way everything stays lifted and pretty. To finish it off, I'll add just a touch of subtle bling. Nothing dramatic, just a couple of tiny sequins here and there. And this is the finished card. Look at how elegant it is and how quickly it came together. The washi tape die cuts really did a lot of the heavy lifting here. I like to make sentiments in batches, which is why I have such a big stash. Anytime I'm die cutting frames, shapes, etc., I keep everything together so I'm future ready. If you're curious about the sleeve I use to store pattern paper and scraps, I'll link that video in the description. It's full of storage and organization hacks. This card came together so fast and it's absolutely beautiful. No glue showing, no messages peeking through, and it even stands up nicely as a display piece. I could add a shimmer spray, but I'm going to stop right here before I take it too far and ruin it completely. Simple is best. Now I can declare this card officially done. For this next card, since I'd already dug out that pattern paper set, I figured I might as well commit and actually use it. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm also using this die set, and I'll be creating a 5.5 by 5.5 square card with a corner fold that stands up as an easel, but with a vellum accent because vellum makes everything better. The first thing I need to do is score my cardstock. This is very thick cardstock, so I'm going to score it at 5.5 inches and then flip it over and score it again on the back. This just helps break down the fibers properly so it folds more easily. The reason I scored first is because it's easier to handle in my smaller trimmer, because I don't like using the trimmer on this as it leaves frayed edges. And even though this is technically the paper curling end of my bone folder, I'm still going to use it to really reinforce the crease because it actually does a great job. Next, I'm going to cut this into a 5.5 inch square, and then I'll show you the next step. Alright, so now I have the card open like a book fold, and I want this corner to fold over. I need to find the groove from this corner to this corner. I'll use some painter's tape as a guide so I can find the track easily. I'm placing the tape along a random groove. I'm choosing one near the middle of the board just so I can keep the cardstock in the middle for convenience. I need to make sure I stay with the same groove when I'm scoring. The key here is to line up the top corner of the card panel with the opposite bottom corner. Once that's aligned, it's so much easier to find the correct groove. I'll start with light pressure because scoring corners can be a little tricky, and I want to ensure I have the scoring just right before committing. By the way, I demo another method in my recent craft hack video in case you don't have a large scoring board like this one. Now that I've scored it once, I'm going to flip it over and score it again. Same idea as before, just breaking down those fibers. So again, corner to corner, hold it firmly and score. And that's it. Now all I need to do is fold it, burnish it really well, and look at how easy that was. When the card opens, it's going to stand up like this. How far it opens and how upright it stands is totally up to you. That will determine where the easel mechanism goes. Now that I have this base done, I could cut out a sentiment or some kind of design element from this scrap piece of heavyweight cardstock to act as the stopper. But before I do that, I want to work on the vellum. Let me check the size here. This is actually a really good size. The card can stand in different ways, but I'll decide later which way I want to orient it. I'm going to use the same vellum and the same embossing folder again, just to show that you can really stretch one embossing folder and get a lot of mileage out of it. I do have that spare piece of embossed vellum from before, but I'm not going to cut into it because if I run it through the die cutting machine again, all that beautiful embossing will flatten out, and we don't want that. That's why I always cut the vellum first and then emboss. Now here's your second hack for this card, creating a perfectly symmetrical frame. I'm using one of my magnetic sheets, the same kind I use to store my dies, but a magnetic fridge calendar also works great. You know, the ones you get in the mail at the beginning of the year. Hold on to those. The reason I love doing this is because when I try to line dies up symmetrically on cardstock, they tend to shift around, especially when I'm taping them down. On a magnetic sheet though, they're not going anywhere unless I want them to. So I can take my time lining this up perfectly. Have the cutting side down, tape it in place, and I know it's going to cut a beautiful even border. Now I can use this frame setup to create as many borders as I want, and they'll be exactly the same size. Now I can use this frame setup to create as many borders as I want, and they'll be exactly the same size. Next, I need to decide on which pattern paper to use so I can pick the frame color. Honestly, these are all gorgeous. I'll link this paper pack if it's still available, though it is a slightly older set. This part is always hard because I want to use all of them, but I'll go with this one and then see if I can find something to coordinate. I think the rose gold would be lovely with this, so that's what I'm choosing. And look at that, what a beautiful frame. Except I made a huge mistake. I forgot that I need a stacking layer for this frame and removed the tapes before creating it. I need the exact same size of the frame, so I'm going to keep my fingers crossed and retry. Otherwise, I'll just cut out another rose gold frame and remember to cut the stacking layers with the same setup. Lesson learned, always hang on to your frames until you're 100% sure you don't need them. But the moral of the story here is, please do as I say and not as I do. I was going to hold on to the frame just in case I wanted another layer, but I actually need the larger die to cut out the vellum. I'm not thinking right. I also need a cardstock piece to act as a buddy for my vellum panel when I emboss it. Now let me emboss the vellum. I'm loving the look again, and I can save the cardstock piece for another project. I'm ready to assemble now that I have my card base and my vellum frame. I cut a second one since this frame will be visible from both sides. That way it looks neat and finished on the back as well. Perfect. I'll let that sit for a moment. While that sets, I'll work on the pattern paper for the inside panels. I need a 5x5 piece for the inside, so I have a 1/4 inch border all around. I also need a second 5x5 for the front. Now I'm going to cut both into triangles here so that when the card opens, this can also act as the stopper for the easel. Let's bring everything back together and see how it looks. I can see just a sliver of white peeking through, and I'm a little finicky about that, so I'll trim it off very gently. Now I'm deciding whether to use roses on the inside, the outside, or everywhere, which is always a dangerous thought, and I've discovered a little hiccup. I cut the roses the wrong way. They're upside down for the orientation I originally planned, but that's okay. We pivot. I'll just have the card open like a diamond instead of sideways like a book fold, and that fixes everything. I'll adhere this, making sure it's closer to the edge so there's a gap in the middle. And look at that, beautiful already. Now let's work on the front. I'll center this carefully. We now have a card that stands up beautifully, but now I need to add the focal piece to the fold, making sure to adhere only the bottom part of the frame. I'll wipe off any excess glue and let it sit for a second. If there's any stubborn glue residue, I'll clean it up with my glue eraser. I'll be adding a sentiment here and some embellishments, but I'll do that in just a moment. Alright, I'm back. I've done some die cutting using the floral dies from this set. I cut some pieces from rose gold cardstock, and I used a sentiment die set to cut out thank you. I also cut the shadow layers from vellum and additional layers of the sentiment from white cardstock so I can stack everything for dimension. I also kept the negative die cut, and maybe you watched me do this trick a million times in earlier videos. Let's start assembling the flowers. I'll bring back my non-stick sheet for gluing. Now for the sentiment. I'll use the saved negative die cut because this die cut is very intricate. If I try to glue it freehand, I risk stretching or distorting it. By placing it back into the negative, I can apply glue safely and keep everything perfectly shaped and aligned. This is another hack I've shared in previous videos, but I wanted to show it here as well. The letters almost fall back into place on their own. I'll pop it out before they stick to the sides of the negative. I'll use this piece as a backing layer, and I'll show you what I mean in a bit. I'll now need to adhere the sentiment to the shadow layer, and for that I'll apply glue first to the center of the word again to make it easier to handle. This gives me much more control and also keeps glue off the vellum in case the die cut adheres crookedly, because glue on vellum will absolutely show and we don't want that. Now, the reason I'm adding this backing layer behind the vellum is to create more separation from the pattern paper. If I place it directly onto the background, it gets a bit lost. But with that slight lift, you get more diffusion, more contrast, and the sentiment stands out better. In hindsight, I could have done 2 backing layers to create more diffusion. Oh well. Now I'll carefully adhere everything, making sure the letters fall exactly where they should. It's a little fiddly, but totally worth it. I love barely art glue for gluing intricate pieces because it has a fine tip nozzle which really helps control the flow of the glue. Now I'll apply glue to the sentiment pieces but won't press them down just yet, so I have a few seconds to adjust the placement slightly if needed. Since the sentiment is raised, it'll act as the second stopper in case the easel front slips over the breaker in the middle. There's still plenty of space to write a message inside, and the card folds completely flat for mailing. I'll finish it off with a few iridescent sequins here and there, nothing too much, just a little sparkle. And that's the finished card. A beautiful display piece with gorgeous pattern paper, and you saw how simple it really was. If you've been watching my videos for a bit, you know I'm all about quick and simple. I stored all the scraps back in the sleeve so I can use them later to embellish the envelope, because we might as well go all in, right? That's it for this card. Let's move on to the next one. So for this final card, I'm going to use this BetterPress plate. It's actually brand new and I haven't used it before, so we're breaking it in together. I already have an A2 card panel ready, and I picked this pattern paper because it isn't busy. It's a really pretty muted color, and as you can see, some of the other patterns in this pack are quite bold. The look I'm going for here is muted, kind of shabby chic, slightly vintage, very soft and understated. So this pattern paper works perfectly for that. Now for the vellum. I'll grab one from my DIY folder here, and if you're interested in learning more about vellum in general, I actually have a ton of videos on vellum. Definitely check out my vellum playlist linked at the end of this video because there's a lot in there. For this card, I need heavyweight vellum. This one here is lightweight. I can feel it right away, and that won't work for what I'm doing because I'll be heat embossing. So I need something sturdier so it causes minimal warping. This one here is the right one. I'll set that aside for now. This is an A2 panel, and I'm going to apply a little bit of temporary glue because I need it to hold in place. I can erase the glue later on with my glue eraser. I need to make sure I have this the right way around, otherwise I'll confuse myself if I have to re-ink, and honestly, no one wants that. You can see the glue showing through here, but I'll wipe it off later. And once we add the heat embossing, it won't be very visible anyway, even if a tiny bit remains. All right, let me reposition this. I'll treat the vellum with anti-static powder, of course, because I'll be heat embossing. The edges don't have to be super precise because I'll be trimming the edges later anyway. And just as a quick note, if you don't have a BetterPress system or press plates that you could use in your die cutting machine, you can absolutely use a stamp to create a background design. You could also use a scripty pattern paper underneath the vellum and add some small background stamps. You don't need the exact setup here to get a similar effect. I'm going to use a white pigment ink because it'll make the white embossing pop just a little bit more. I'll run this through my Spellbinders machine. I can see the white impression now, so I'll set this aside and bring in a scrap piece of paper to apply the embossing powder. I'm using Altenew Pure White Embossing Powder, and this is my absolute favorite. Since this is pigment ink, it shouldn't dry too quickly, but I still want to make sure it's wet enough to grab the embossing powder properly. I can see some stray powder sticking where it shouldn't, but I'm not too worried about the edges since those will be trimmed off like I mentioned, and I'm much more concerned about the center. All right, so I've got this ready. Now I'll place it here so I can pick it up easily. I'll use my magnetic glass mat again, and I'm actually going to take advantage of the glue in the middle to help hold this piece in place, and also use my magnets to hold the vellum down. Now, a quick tip when heat embossing vellum. Always run your heat tool for a bit before bringing it to the vellum. You want it nice and hot so you're not blasting the vellum for too long. The glass mat will become hot and reflect the heat back into the vellum. And yes, this took a hot moment to melt since there was quite a bit. I'll place it right over the pattern paper so you can see what's happening here. Look at that. It creates such a beautiful diffusion effect. I'm going to let this cool down for a couple of minutes, and while that's happening, I'll move on to the next step. I'm using the A2 Matting Basics die. I'll use a pencil to mark off how much I need instead of trying to use my 4 brain cells calculating measurements. I'll cut this piece out and be right back. You probably think I'm really stingy with my paper, but I honestly don't like to waste, although most scraps go into the recycling bin. Now I want the vellum to have a torn edge. I'll flip the vellum over so I can erase any pencil marks if needed. I'll start tearing from here. And then I realize, yes, I also need to tear this side. Of course, I didn't plan for that part. This is being a little tricky, but okay, there we go. That looks great. I do need to add a frame here because that's how I'll be able to attach everything securely to the card panel. I'm going to use these Pinkfresh Studio Essentials stitch scallop dies, and I'll also use the same small flowers from the Spellbinder scallop dies as before. I think larger flowers would feel a bit crowded here, so I'm sticking with the tiny ones. I'll cut everything out and be right back. Alright, I'm back after all the die cutting. I also pulled a sentiment from my stash while I was at it. What I love about this Pinkfresh frame die set is that you can use the frames individually or nest them together like this. And that's exactly how I'm going to use them. I love using my Craft Stacks boxes to keep everything organized. Alright, let's get started. Here's the thing, I want to attach the vellum to the card panel, but I can't put glue around the edges or directly on the vellum because the adhesive will show. So the frame needs to go on first so I can hide the glue behind it. So that's step 1. I used some scrap paper and created 2 layers here just to give the frame a bit more sturdiness. I'll flip it over and apply glue to both layers so nothing shifts. I'll center it and hold it in place for a few seconds so the glue has time to grab since the background is textured. Next, I'll adhere this to the card panel. I'm only applying glue behind the frame. I'll center it, and honestly, even if it's a little crooked, it adds to the charm because the edges are torn. The corners are lifting slightly, so I'll add a bit of glue here, apply it to the card panel instead of the vellum, and thin it out with my finger so it doesn't show through. The loose edges don't really bother me. I'm going to add thin slivers of cardstock to the side that's hanging off. I don't want to use foam tape because it would make it too tall and throw everything out of balance. I'll cut some narrow strips. They don't need to be perfect because they won't show. And once I place this down, you can see it's completely level now. I'll trim off the excess and apply glue to the whole piece. I really love the contrast here since everything is pale and soft. I cut the foliage from brushed silver cardstock and the flowers from the same pattern paper as the background and white cardstock that I'll use as a shadow layer for the larger flowers, and also the smaller flowers are white and silver. I think it creates a beautifully elegant look. I'll offset the flowers just slightly so you get that tiny shadow because it adds dimension without bulk. I'll assemble all the flowers, and for this card, I'm not adding the centers yet. Once the flowers are in place, I'll add rhinestones to the centers and sprinkle a few around the panel. Now it's time to finish the card with some foam tape behind the card panel. Here's the finished card. Look at how pretty this is. All I did was add vellum as an accent. I could have stopped with just the blue card panel, the frame, and the die cuts, and it would have been lovely. But that little bit of vellum adds so much texture without adding bulk. Now, here are all three cards together. The first one used as an embossed vellum panel on the card front, and I found some pretty envelopes from Honeybee that go well with these cards. The second one used the same embossed panel with a frame and a corner folding easel design. And you see, I used the pattern paper scraps to embellish the envelope. And this final one features the vellum accent with the BetterPress plate. If you love the look of vellum but you need some more ideas for using them, you should check out this vellum playlist here.